If you're an artist who's looking to get into the recording studio soon to record some songs, then this video is for you. Hey everyone, it's Joseph Cheek here from Island Recording Studios, and today I've got a few quick tips for you that'll make your next recording session more efficient, more productive, and overall just more enjoyable. So here we go. First tip. The best thing you can do before heading into the studio to record your music is to do some pre-production. So pre-production is basically like recording a demo of your music at home before you get into the studio. This does wonders for your recording session. First of all, it'll help you work out the exact tempo of the song before you get to the studio. Recording at the wrong tempo, even if it's only 1 or 2 beats a minute off, can completely ruin the vibe of your song. If it's too fast, then you may struggle to keep up with the singing, and the whole song will just sound a little bit rushed and sound a little bit like you're tripping over your words. But if it's too slow, it'll completely kill the energy of the song. Years ago, my old band made this exact mistake in the studio. We were recording a song that was one of our most popular ones live, and we'd literally recorded every single part apart from the sax track. And all along I had this little niggling feeling that something wasn't quite sitting right but couldn't put my finger on it. Anyway, the sax player came in to do his part, and we played him the song just so he could hear it before he recorded. And immediately he said, "Why is it recorded so slow?" And that's when it hit us. We'd messed up. We recorded the song too slow and it had completely killed the vibe. And as it was a really upbeat reggae song, the vibe was so crucial. So unfortunately we ended up completely scrapping that and then coming back to it at a later stage. So the first big step in that pre-production is to work out the exact tempo for your song. And if there are any tempo changes in the song, then it's good to map them out as well. So when you get into the studio, you can give the engineer the exact tempo map and they'll know which section is which tempo and they can program that into their DAW. Throughout pre-production, you'll also get a really good idea for the instrumentation and the arrangement that you want in your song. And you may not have the capabilities to record all the different parts at home, and that's completely fine. But the more you can do, the clearer the idea in your head will be for what you want for the final product. And you can relay all that information to the engineer either before or when you get into the studio, and that'll help them get the overall picture for what you want, and they'll be able to help you with those parts that you weren't able to do at home. So to me, when bands come into the studio, it's so obvious which ones have done that pre-production and which ones haven't. The ones that have done it always have such efficient sessions, they know exactly what they want, and they get through everything so fast because they've already recorded it before as kind of a practice run, so they're comfortable with their parts and the recording of their parts, not just playing them live. So they just come in and smash it out. Then generally we'll have a bit more time left over at the end of the session to work out any other overdubs or layers to really enhance the song. So next up on our list is instrument prep. Your instruments are the things that are going to impact the overall sound of your recording the most. So it doesn't matter if you're recording in the fanciest studio in the world with the most expensive mics and outboard gear, if you're using some old beat up guitar that you got for $30 off Marketplace. If anything, all the fancy gear will just really highlight how bad the guitar is. And if you're trying to sound like John Mayer, for example, and you have some cheap Stratocaster knockoff that just sounds horrific, unfortunately, no matter what amp, no matter what gear you're using, you're not going to sound like John Mayer. And worse still, and I've had this exact experience in the studio, somebody wanted that classic Strat sound, and they brought in this like horrific Les Paul knockoff. I don't know what the brand was, probably unbranded. And literally coming out of the guitar, somehow it was already distorted before it hit any pedals or amp. And no matter what we did, we just couldn't get it to not sound distorted. And it wasn't a pleasant distortion, it was horrific. So that was a real eye-opener for me early on in my career, that the instruments you use are so crucial. So if you don't own the instrument that'll give you the tone you need, first of all is check with the studio. They may have one on hand. So if we use that Strat example, I guess a lot of studios are going to have a nice Fender Strat in their collection. So otherwise you could check with a friend, and if you ask nicely, you might be able to borrow it for the session. So that goes for all instruments. You want to have the highest quality instruments to record with that you can, and there's always ways to find one. So either the studio, borrowing, or even hiring instruments if you need to. It'll make the overall sound so much better. But if you do have great instruments already on hand, then that's fantastic. But you have to make sure everything is prepped and playing as well as it possibly can. So if we're using the guitar still for the example, you have to make sure there's good strings on there. Don't come into the studio with old rusty strings. Preferably put some new ones on. Make sure the intonation is correct. And anything else that you need to do to your guitar to get it in its tip-top shape, then do that before the session. If you're not sure on how to do some of those things, then it's definitely a good idea to take it into the shop and get it set up professionally. If you're a drummer, don't come into the studio with old beaten up drum heads on your kit. Put some new heads on and that'll make a massive difference. If you've got a squeaky kick pedal, then get some WD-40 out and give it some of that. We definitely don't want that squeak all the way through the recording. Basically, whatever you can do to get your instrument in its absolute best shape before the recording session, then do it. It'll make such a difference to your final product, and it'll just make the recording process so much quicker and easier if the tones that you're capturing at the very start are super close to the ones that are going to be at the final product. You've probably heard the saying, fix it in the mix. But really, we all know that's not a real thing, and all you can really do in the mix is try and make it closer to that reference. And obviously you can make sounds better, but if you're using some old knockoff of a Les Paul, like I said, and you want the final product to be a really nice, clean Strat sound, unfortunately, you're never going to get there no matter what you do in the mixing process. So mixing should really just be about enhancing everything that's already recorded and getting it to sit as well as possible with all the other elements. We can't drastically change things from one horrific sound to a beautiful polished sound. So keep all those things in mind as you're preparing for your session. And that can also tie back in to the pre-production, just knowing what tones and what sounds you want. And that leads us perfectly to our next point, which is reference tracks. So reference tracks can be great for your engineer so that they have an overall picture and overall sound in their head of what you're wanting to achieve. So you definitely don't want to get through a whole recording session and your amp set on the dirty channel, for example, so it's coming out pretty overdriven. And then at the end of the session, you tell your engineer, yeah, I want this like really clean sound for my guitar, after you've already recorded everything distorted. So giving your engineer reference tracks before you start recording will just help everyone get on the same page, and then that way you can work together with your engineer and dial in the exact sounds that you want in your final product. So reference tracks can be great for an overall picture of the sound, and they can also be used for individual elements of the sounds that you want to capture. So for example, it could be just the drum sound of a particular recording that you'd like for your song. But one key thing to do here is not to give your engineer a bunch of different references for every single instrument that just don't work well together. So I had this as well a few years ago, where someone gave me the reference for the drum and bass sound they wanted for their record. And it was a super old recording, I think from the 60s, super lo-fi, just not a pleasant sound. Like, it was very cool for the song it was in at the time in the 60s. However, then they gave me reference tracks for the guitars and vocals that they wanted in their song, which were a super modern recording, real bright, clear. They sounded great. However, they just didn't mesh well with this super old lo-fi drums and bass. So if you are using different songs for different instruments for reference, just be careful and always keep in mind, do these sounds actually blend together? And will they form a cohesive mix that makes sense? And if they don't, maybe then try and look for songs that already have an overall sound that you'd like to achieve. And I'll just reiterate, it's best to give your engineer reference tracks before you start recording. So don't give them to them after the second mix revision and then expect the engineer to change everything that everyone's done up until that point. So the recording and all the other mixing that's happened. It's not fair on them, and it's just not going to result in a good product at the end. So give them to them up front. It's always best if you can actually go to a studio, say 2 or 3 weeks before recording, sit down, have a chat with the engineer, play some reference tracks, play any pre-production demos that you've got, and that way everyone's visions are aligned. well and truly ahead of the recording, so everyone's in the same headspace and has the same end product in mind. Finally on our list is a simple one, is to be well rested before your session. A good night's sleep can be so helpful in so many ways in life, but especially in the studio. It's a very exciting time when you're heading into the studio and takes a lot of creative and emotional energy. And I often see artists, by the time it gets to 4 p.m, they're feeling pretty tired just because their brains have been so switched on all day. And really the studio is the culmination of all this hard work you've put in, writing the music, performing the music live, doing pre-production demos. Now you're finally in the studio hearing it come to life, which is super exciting, but also just that creative energy and emotional energy is so high for such a long period of time that it can be draining. So get a good night's sleep before you come into the studio and you'll find it's so much easier to be creative. You won't be relying on coffee or Red Bull to get you through the day, and it'll just make for a happier, more enjoyable session. So I hope those tips help you for when you head into the studio for your next recording session. If you have any questions or comments, leave them below, and then please like and subscribe so we can continue to give you more tips and tricks to help your recordings be the best they possibly can be. Thanks, and see you soon.